I think there's an element of like naivete or almost like recklessness in like starting a company. It helps to have some remove from the space so you do think about things differently, right? Because if you're just going to come in and kind of do it the way it's already been done before, like you're just not going to get a lot of traction. You're not going to do anything really disruptive.
Welcome to another episode of The Current, a bi-monthly podcast exploring the intersection of people, finance, and data. I'm Ansel Parikh, co-founder of Finch, the connectivity platform for the employment ecosystem. And today I'm joined by Jeff Rosenberger, a veteran of the Fintech space. He led business development at Wealthfront during the company's pivot to automated investments and led product strategy at Earnest before it was acquired by Navient. For the last 9 years, Jeff served as the chief operating officer at Guideline, where he was instrumental in growing the platform from a small startup to a leading 401k provider with billions of dollars under management. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ansel.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here and really excited to dig in and learn a little bit more about your journey growing Guideline to what it is today. But before we get there, you've had a really interesting career path up to this point. So I'm curious, what was the aha moment that made you want to join Guideline? What did you see early in that product or the team that made you say, hey, this is something that could be really big?
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit on it right there, which is like first and foremost about the team. I first got introduced to Kevin Busque early 2015. So I met him a couple times in person, and then the CTO and co-founder was in Portland, Maine. He actually came out for some meetings they had, and I met with him as well, Mike Nelson, and then the third co-founder, Jeremy Caballero, was like kind of the design and like product leader. And I really like the three of them a lot. I like them together, the three of them, like how they interacted. They had all worked together at TaskRabbit before, and we were, excited to do it again. So there was a level of like trust and understanding and complementariness of their skill set. But then I also felt like I could really help them out because I had worked at Wealthfront and in and around like financial products before that. And so to me, it was kind of obvious of like, hey, I could help these guys like build it out. And they had at that time 3 full-time employees working with them. So it was just a team of 6, so super early. And then the product, it was just clear that there was something there. I had some initial context and understanding about the opportunity for the 401k space because even when I was at Wealthfront, I would go sometimes with Andy Ratcliffe, who was the founder at Wealthfront, and do these investment seminars. And then I did a bunch of them myself. And I would go to these companies, and a lot of times they were getting liquidity for their employees. And they wanted to make sure their employees had some basics around how to like invest. So we gave a very like non-salesy like presentation or seminar, like here's how you do it. And then someone go like, hey, what does Wealthfront do? And we kind of be like, okay, now you give me permission to give you the 30-second like sales pitch. But what I kept hearing from the execs after we'd wrap that up is, hey, when are you guys going to build 401k? When are you going to build 401k? And so I left Wealthfront mid 2014. So when I got introduced to Kevin early 2015, I kind of had a prepared mind. And then I think the other thing too about all these things is like, and I learned this actually from Andy Ratcliffe, and I think they're really great investors all kind of think this way, which is like, there's lots of really great ideas out there for starting businesses. I think one of the most compelling things is like, why now? Like, what's the situation or the institutional environment that makes sense to do this now? Yeah. I think for Kevin, he was pretty articulate and like, hey, we can build these integrations using APIs, really deep integrations. I'm not as technical as the co-founder, so I didn't immediately understand what he meant by all that. But then I realized the big advantage was it could allow you to lower the cost of service, and then ultimately through channel partnerships, the cost of acquisition as well. And so this will be entertaining for you. But like at that time, Gusto wasn't even Gusto. That was our very first partner. It was ZenPayroll. And so Kevin was already talking to them. I worked as an advisor first and over the course of most of 2016 and helped him think about how to craft and negotiate that partnership along with some other things. Back then, Gusto was ZenPayroll. They had about 30,000 businesses on their platform. I think they have about 500,000 now. So there was an element of luck to that too, which is good timing. But they were really looking for a partner who could kind of co-develop these APIs and build really deep integrations. And the one other advantage that we had was Mike Nelson, the CTO, was very technical and is kind of the fabled 10X engineer. He built the backend in such a way and the record keeping system where you could really integrate very tightly between the Guideline 401k system and then the Gusto payroll system on the other side. And I know Finch is like, you guys done a really, really great job like driving into this like opportunity and scaling it for other business lines and different industry areas and stuff. So I think that was really powerful stuff. I think the one thing that sat on top of that also was the sort of business partnership or business relationship that we had with them of, hey,
Mhm.
they were growing, they had a bunch of backlog of demand, and so they would kind of point that to us. So it was not only the product and the timing of these developments of these third party APIs, but it just seemed like coming together. I'm like, hey, great team, great product, right time. I could see how I could help them. So I was an advisor for a little while, and then ultimately October 2016 joined as the chief operating officer after they raised their Series A round that summer.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, that's super helpful context. And also, like, I love that you're joining when it's a like single digit number of people and you know every person's role. And it's like the minimum amount of people required to have like a fully regulated business that has like proper clearance and certifications on the team. And so, I think what's also interesting, at no point in this did you talk about like, hey, one of these people, one of the co-founders were experts in this industry. In fact, everyone was kind of building that context in an industry that has kind of been doing the same thing the same way for decades. And so I'm curious, like, you join in, how did Guideline's like investment strategy differ from like the rest of the industry, which again it's been pretty static since I'd almost say the 80s.
Yeah. Let me just say one thing on your point. I think there's an element of like naivete or almost like recklessness and like starting a company. You're an entrepreneur. I've never actually started a company. I'm very good at joining entrepreneurs very early on, where like, hey, I can see this coming together, kind of like right around the Series A when it was six people going to 15, 20 people, and that was very similar to when I joined Wealthfront. I do think it helps to have some remove from the space so you do think about things
Mhm.
differently, right? Because if you're just going to come in and kind of do it the way it's already been done before, like you're just not going to get a lot of traction. You're not going to do anything really disruptive. So yeah, to your point on the investment part of the product, or to your question, Kevin had this mindset of like, hey, why would we charge asset-based fees at all? Right? Like,
Yeah.
let's do this differently. And then like, hey, we have this opportunity to do the investment solution differently as well. Wealthfront and Betterment had both like championed and started this kind of robo advice space, which had gotten a fair bit of attention. And so it was pretty clear that like, hey, we could actually build out a robo advisor now just instead of a direct to consumer model, like Wealthfront or Betterment or others, like we could actually do it in a B2B model in the 401k space. That was pretty cool. So it ended up being like six investment models. They were diversified portfolios of index funds or ETFs, and it's kind of boring stuff in a way because it's like, hey, just put your money in. You
Yeah.
don't have to think about it. We'll take care of it for you. But most people actually want to invest that way. They got day jobs, kids, families, other responsibilities and stuff. And maybe other outside accounts. Maybe they have that Robinhood account or whatever that's kind of their play money. But for their retirement money, it's nice to know, hey, you got some professionals and licensed people that are working to keep this really low cost, diversified, very long-term centric kind of strategy. And so, yeah, so it just kind of evolved from there. And even at the time, we did not charge any asset-based fees at all. So it was really interesting because our solution with the six managed portfolios of the ETFs, primarily Vanguard ETFs, pretty much the whole way, they were actually lower cost than if you took a target date fund, like the packaged kind of retirement fund from Vanguard. So I guess I'll say one thing, which is at Wealthfront, we use ETFs because it's very easy on that kind of platform. On the
Mhm.
Guideline, a platform on 401k, it's actually easier to plug in on the back end with 40 Act funds. So we use, more traditional index funds, but they have their ETF equivalent. So yeah, it was pretty cool. It's pretty great that, and the co-founders were already kind of down the path on doing that when I was joining. So it was more like, hey, I was licensed as well with this Series 65 I got in my time at Wealthfront. So it's like I effectively became the chief investment officer of the solution. It was pretty cool to see it scale to a billion and then 10 billion and ultimately 20 billion at the time of
Yeah.
the acquisition.
Yeah, I'm curious because there's a lot of, I think when I look at Guideline, one of the things I really appreciate is just how it's like it's very like consumer friendly, right? I think especially when you think about the experience at the more traditional providers out there, it's like okay, I don't really know what I'm signing up for. I have to like read through a lot of things. It's definitely designed with like a very like user orientation that I think a lot of times when I talk to companies, especially B2B ones, if you have someone that has some experience on the consumer side, like you do at Wealthfront, you take a little bit of these like learnings that I think aren't necessarily the DNA of like a B2B company. So I'm curious if there was any like interesting, I wouldn't say hacks, but learnings that you got from Wealthfront that you're like, oh, this is something that's going to translate really well to what we did at Guideline, given that, you have small business that's maybe not super literate on exactly what a 401k is and how to set it up.
Yeah. I'm not a designer by trade, but feel like I know good designers and marketers when I see them. So I'll say that like I had that perspective, but I will also give a ton of credit to Jeremy Cavallero, or Cavs is his nickname. The third co-founder is kind of the product and design leader. But I think Cavs is really great. He's very like focused on user-centered design. And to your point, and so like both the B2B side of like, hey, how do you help a small business owner with 8 employees who's never signed up for a 401k, like do this without like too much brain damage. Just like click through, they understand the questions you're asking, you're prompting them, you're trying to take decisions away where they don't really matter, like keep it simple. And then the layer through that, which is okay, now the business owner has signed, set this up, signed up, set it up, authorized the payroll integration with Gusto or whomever, QuickBooks or Rippling or whoever. Those are the three biggest partners ultimately for us. But like set up that integration, just kind of click through that process. Very transparent. We try to keep that a couple of minutes. But then after that, we would auto enroll the employees. And then when they got that notice, it was intended to be just like really transparent, really clear, assume they basically had never invested before. And I think to your point, the co-founders had never worked in the retirement space or even in the finance space. So like in some ways, like I was a bit of the expert, but I'd never worked directly. I'd only been a 401k participant. So I think it was pretty cool because it was just like the level of innovation and how quickly we moved in those first, 3, 4, 5 years was actually like really, really a lot of fun. And so I do think you're touching on an important thing, which is like, how do you meet people where they are? We did also have auto enrollment, which is very much like an opt-out system for the participants. So if they never engaged at all, they actually got auto enrolled and they had to make an affirmative decision not to. But that would be, I think it was about a third or maybe 30% of the participants were like totally passive. Everyone else basically is like, oh, I'm being auto enrolled and would engage and typically go through our kind of like robo advice like questionnaire, get the portfolio set up. But yeah, I think keeping it simple and keep the jargon out, I think is really important too.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And it's, I like that you can never make it too simple, right? Especially when you're just trying to make sure that people get like clarity on value and understand like what do they need to do, why that matters. The sooner you can get to that and cut through all of I think jargon is definitely something we've learned, especially in the 401k space. There's a lot of acronyms, a lot of jargon. And so
Yeah,
it's easy to like fall into that.
I think the other part of that too is like we were very much like a bundled, what you call in the industry, like a bundled provider in the sense that like, Kevin had the mindset of, hey, let's go kind of the other term you'll hear for this is like full stack. It's like,
Yep.
okay, let's either build it or let's go negotiate with the third party that we need to on behalf of our clients, right? Like we had a business relationship with Vanguard, but there's actually no contract there because we use off the shelf like products from them, right? But we had to like work with a trust company and plug in, to State Street for the end assets to be held. So it's like people don't need to think through that. Which is like, hey, your end assets are held at State Street. You're going to see the ACHs going out there. We'll provide you with your statements. There's third-party verification of like your account information. Like, okay, done. We're using low-cost Vanguard index funds and a diversified portfolio. People are like, okay, great. Like, next question, right? Like, just keep it so simple. So it's like you just reduce the kind of cognitive load for the customer or would-be customer.
Yeah. And so you've done like a bunch of, I feel like you've made a lot of like micro decisions that then lead up to this like scale. And so you went from like a startup to like the third largest source of new 401k plans in the country. And so I'm wondering, we were talking about like the 10-year overnight success. Were there one or two like key decisions that kind of helped drive that inflection to this type of scale? Since again, like few people get to be on that type of ride and you got that front row seat for the entire time.
Yeah, I think there were a couple things. Kevin and the co-founders had already started down the path with ZenPayroll, so I helped like Kevin negotiate that initial contract. One of the first things I did when I came in was renegotiate that contract. So I think it's like really, really just invest into that relationship beyond the ongoing technical partnership too. Like we did a great job on the technical side, doing a lot of what your firm does, of just making sure the integrations work really well together. I do remember another really critical decision, which is around that time, Parker Conrad had left Zenefits. It was like, there's a lot of kind of like smoke coming off of all of that. And I don't really want to get into all that here. I know Parker a little bit, but I also have some friends in common with him. And so it was like pretty simple to have a discussion with him. And I think it was like, Kevin and I were like, at that point, it's hard to imagine now given Rippling success, but we were sort of like, hey, is this a good idea, like, to get partnered up with him? And we were like, you know what, that guy's a hell of an entrepreneur. And we think they can really, potentially scale this up. And there's an opportunity like in that particular part of the market. But I remember having that thought of like, And I think it was one of those things where like we were early enough where like we can, it's easier for us to take a little more risk.
Hmm.
And we made the right decision, be like, yeah, like he might pull this off again. And, he did to his credit and the team. So I think that was a really critical point. I think the other thing too that we haven't touched on is I do think like in this scenario where I spent a lot of time was we did lean a lot on public policy in part
Yeah.
because it was moving a lot in the retirement space. So back to that question earlier, discussion earlier on like why now? Is it a technology breakthrough or in our case in this space could be, oh, now there's ETFs where you can like trade these things on that are kind of platform agnostic, right? Like there can be steps forward in product that are less technical as well. But like what are the technical and product breakthroughs? And then I think also like either interest rate environment or kind of cyclical things that like provide great tailwind. And then also kind of on the policy side, there were major pieces of federal retirement legislation that were passed the end of 2019. That was actually President Trump that signed that. And then the end of 2022, that was the Secure Act. And then end of 22, Joe Biden signed the Secure 2.0. And so there's a lot in both of those, but there were some things that just like, hey, greater tax incentives for starting new 401k plans, more lean into auto enrollment and other auto features like auto escalation, which just like we were skating to where the puck was going in a lot of ways
Yeah.
there in both our pricing model and that we already did auto enrollment. So it was really leaning in on all of that. The starter K was an example of a kind of accessible, it's almost like an IRA delivered through a 401k where there's no employer match. It's a
Hmm.
kind of stripped down 401k. That was really great. That was in the Secure 2.0. And we were first to market in 2023. And I remember a discussion we had internally debating, hey, should we do this? Should we build this? And I was a big advocate for it. One of the other really senior product folks was a real big advocate for it. And, we went round and round. We're like, hey, we're going to be able to like make money on this. It's going to need to be at a really low cost point. But what
Right.
we realized is that they're going to create a market segment that sits between these state programs like Cal
Hmm.
Savers and so forth, which are these auto IRAs, Roth IRAs, and then the kind of more traditional 401k, which for Guideline, most of those were safe harbor plans, which
Hmm.
included or required an employer match of 3 or 4%. So it's like, hey, there's a product space potentially in the middle where an employer can't match, but the employer can actually pay all the admin fees
Right.
for this and can have it be a really great technical solution versus working with like a state program like Cal Savers or Oregon Safe. So I think a couple of those key product decisions were really, really critical. I think, betting on some of the partners at the right time. So it took a lot longer than we expected. We were working on that for years, but we never gave up. We were very resilient. We kept working on it. We were also refused to do a bad deal. I mean, they negotiated really hard. We had to just like wait because they wanted us to sign this bad deal. And I remember leaving a restaurant in Portland, Maine from a dinner and just like, and it was earlier out in California and talking to the kind of partnership person at Intuit. And she was negotiating really hard. And I basically just told her straight up, I'm like, we're not going to do a bad deal because if we do, it's bad for the company. And I won't even be the person you're dealing with here a year from now. So I'd rather do
Right.
no deal or just wait. And we will do a good deal and we'll do a win-win deal that will work for you guys and for us. So I think getting some of those key decisions right, I think were important. I think there's some mistakes we made too. Like I do think we charge no asset-based fees for most of the companies or the first half of the company's life before we got acquired. I kind of think that was a bit of a mistake because it made it switching away from that was a mistake because it kind of made us look a little more like the rest of the marketplace, even though we
Hmm.
didn't charge nearly as much asset-based fees. It goosed our revenue. So that was 2021 that we introduced an asset-based fee. It was really low, and we thought, okay, well, that's fine. But I do think it kind of took away some of our brand differentiation. So in hindsight, I wish maybe we had done that a little bit differently, or maybe just found some other way to like put it into employer fees, or even if they could put the participant fees in terms of like fixed dollar amount, the SaaS fee onto the employees. I think that would have been more elegant, and we could have kept up with the brand and all of that. So yeah, you learn some of these things, the hard way too.
Yeah, that's the challenge of startups. You kind of have to do it to see what happens, and then kind of learn from the mistakes as you go. But maybe last thing on maybe the broader industry, and it's just something that I've noticed personally as you kind of start to see the emergence of like robo advisors. Wealthfront was one of the pioneers of that, but now you have a lot more companies that are starting to offer like investment type services. Obviously, you have like Robinhood coming in to really democratize like trading and things like that. So there's just like this whole new generation of like retail investors that are like very active in the stock market, whether it's investing in meme stocks or actually like building portfolios. A lot of them though are also learning from like non-accredited influencers, right? It's not like how you or me learn from an advisor or someone that at least has some credentials. So I'm curious, like, when you take a step back of this like shift in behavior, what do you think of the implications of like having this bigger retail, investor base, but that there's maybe fragmented education? What does that have on the impact of like retirement industry? Does that drive participation? Does it create weird risk tolerances? I'm curious how you think about it.
I think probably a bit of both. I mean, I do think I have a lot of respect for Vlad and what the team have built there over the years. I mean, obviously, it's just like a juggernaut. Like, it's really impressive. And I think that insight of just, hey, how do you make it more back to the point of make it simple, make it more accessible, in this case, mobile first. A ton of respect for that. And I do think like it's probably drawn a lot more interest in people in, right? I do think there is a question of, well, is that if it's too much fun, is it like really good in investing? And I'm generally like, this is going to sound like kind of stuffy, but I'm kind of like, I think often not, right? Like, I think you're kind of better off for the
Right.
most point of having like a diversified portfolio, keep it low cost, hold it kind of over time. But I'm not like an absolutist on that. Like, I think like if people have, a couple percent of their net worth or whatever in a Robinhood account and they play around with stocks, I'd be very careful with anything with like leverage or options. Like, you need to be really careful because some of that stuff can be very tricky. But like if you just dabble and trade some stocks here and there because you have the time and interest in doing it, as long as you know what game you're playing, and in many ways it's the most competitive game in the world, right? Like the hedge fund managers are just about the most well compensated people in the entire world. So that's who you're kind of competing against. So like if you want to play around a little bit, like on the side, I think that's fine. I think in terms of like your core investments, your like long-term investments, your retirement, I think it's important to do that pretty thoughtfully. The one thing I'd say about it is like, if you're always if you're spend too much of your like life in too big of a rush to get wealthy by like trading stocks or whatever, like you might actually miss the real opportunity, which is like just do it slowly, repeatedly. Like, I was just looking up before we jumped on. There's like $48 trillion in the US retirement system. That is a juggernaut, like an absolute juggernaut. There's like 19 trillion in IRAs. That's the single biggest chunk, trillion with the T, right? And then retirement plans are like 13, 14 trillion, including 401k plans. And so, like, I just think like, hey, as long as most of that 48 trillion is invested mostly in stocks and continuously held. And I do think that's one of the reasons why the US stock market, robo advice and retirement plans and more auto enrollment and more employers matching. I think that is part of the reason why this market kind of seems a little unstoppable.
So last couple questions, and I'll let you go. But I think you all have been at your time at Guideline, you've been the driver of like innovation in this industry that again hasn't changed a whole lot in decades prior. And so I'm curious, like from your vantage point, what does the future of the retirement industry look like? Are there certain opportunities to build new things? Is it really about like improving and iterating on what exists? Curious just how you're thinking about it.
I think there's kind of three or four areas that I'm kind of focused on. I do think like continuing to kind of watch crypto, and I'm no expert on that. I'd like to see more innovation that obviously is like, great, this actually really moves the financial system forward in like more obvious ways. So, and maybe I'm not paying enough attention to the space to know that that's already happening. But I'd say like I continue to watch that. I do think like AI, I think is important. Like, how are people, I think people are going to, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude asking, financial questions, tax questions. I think you should be a little wary about putting some of your data in there. But I also think like that's human nature. And I think I use it to do research and stuff. So I think that's very natural. The question is, are financial advisors going to use that? And then what does that look like? So I think there are different delivery modes of how financial advice can come through AI, and hopefully most of it is good and gets better over time. So I think the AI space is one to watch. I do think, I mentioned the IRA numbers at 19 trillion. I do think just there's more and more money there. There's generational wealth transfer going
Mhm.
on there too. So I think there's kind of like macro financial kind of things. And then I think the last thing is in just an interest area for me. It's like, how does the policy evolve, right? Like, it's going to be probably this round of senators that get voted in that actually will have to put their hands on the Social Security system, or we'll get to the point, I think we're within that time frame in which by default, they'll cut benefits down from 100% to like 80%, unless, they pass some legislation to change all of that. So I think like, what's the policy change on to make Social Security more robust? I think it plays a really important role in a lot of people's lives and is very, very popular. So I think, yeah, it's long-winded way to say like, I think policy is something to just kind of keep track of, because especially around financial products and major technology products, it can have enormous impact.
Yeah. Definitely. And so I have one final question for you. Given everything we talked about today and all the different shifts that are happening in the industry, what will your job look like in 5 years?
Well, right now I'm taking a break. So after the acquisition happened, so I don't know. Let's check back in the fall. But I do think so that I have stepped away from Gusto after a couple months after the acquisition. That acquisition was November of last year, and then I was there for a couple months afterwards. And now the second half of our transaction, which we sold the non-Gusto payroll side of the business, our customers not on Gusto payroll off to Vestwell. That's closed. So it's great to have that all now behind us. And there's a good chunk of the former Guideline folks at Gusto, helping to drive the Gusto 401k platform forward. Yeah. So for me, I don't actually know. I do think like the AI space is interesting. I mean, I sort of going back to your prior question, which is like, where is the innovation going to come from? I really like financial products. I worked a little bit in lending. I worked mostly I spent the biggest chunks of my career at Wealthfront and Guidelines. So I do think the kind of asset management space is interesting. I do have a lot of respect for what Robinhood and Vlad and the team have built there. Some of it honestly scares me just a little bit, but I think it's actually also, they've made it, they've drawn a lot of people in and got them going sooner. Hopefully a lot of those people then, invest, more seriously as they get, further on in their careers and lives and stuff. So I have a lot of respect for what they've built. So I always keep a close eye on what they're up to. I'm still a shareholder in Wealthfront. They went public recently. I like, that they're continuing to innovate as well. So I think I'm keeping a close eye on both of those companies. And then, what other companies, spin up from here and start innovating. Yeah.
No, it's well, we'll definitely check in, kind of follow your journey, and it's super exciting to have you. So again, thank you so much for coming in and talking about your journey as well as some of the interesting evolutions that are going to happen over the next 5 years as well.
Yeah, you bet. And so that was fun. Appreciate it.